Jeffrey Cheah and Professor Win Tai Wu, and ladies and gentlemen. I am very delighted and particularly honored to have the opportunity to give this luncheon speech, at the inaugural conference of Jeffrey Cheah Institute on Southeast Asia. In this lecture, I first draw important lessons for the current and the future policymakers from the Japanese and the United States and European experience of the past 2 decades of so-called credit bubbles and their bust. Although there are many lessons or regret, to be precise, for the former policymaker, myself. In the past 20 years of policy experience, I would like to pick up 3, A, B, C. The A is avoid wishful thinking and face reality. And the B, be proactive, not reactive. And C, communicate effectively. Then, based on 3 lessons, I present a preliminary assessment of Abenomics and the board monetary policy of the Bank of Japan. And this assessment is indeed very preliminary, since much of the quote, beef, and the quote of the Abenomics is still to come, even at this moment. However, this assessment may still be more appropriate than otherwise, since the Japanese policymaker intentionally or unintentionally learned from these lessons drawn from the past policy experience or past policy mistakes, as in the famous quote of Oscar Wilde. Thus, the examination of his policy so far on the ground of 3 lessons shed light of future policy development in developed countries, as well as developing countries in Asia, like Malaysia. Yes. Let me start the first lesson, which is avoid wishful thinking, face the reality. We have observed overly optimistic forecasts so many times, not only in the so-called the bubble period, but also in the economic crisis that followed. Wishful thinking is especially damaging in crisis, since it leads to the behavior of waiting for the old normal, which never comes. The old normal never comes. This caused a substantial delay in implementation of necessary policy measures. In fact, there is ample evidence of initial underestimation of problems that later became large and threatening. It is rather striking to see wishful thinking is found even demographic forecasts. This is particularly problematic in Japan, since the negative impact of unfavorable demographic conditions, fewer children and more non-working older people, is one of the underlying causes of 2-decade-long stagnation of domestic demand in Japan. The next 2 figures illustrate the presence of wishful thinking, even in the professional forecast of demographies. Figure 1, this figure 1, shows the history of revision of Japanese total fertility rate forecast. The dark blue line is actual fertile rate. The light blue line is a forecast made at 1976, and this is 1982, and then this is 1997, and this is 2002, and this is 2006. So you see, wishful thinking is really working on. And but finally, we are lucky enough, and this is the bottom, and finally we are lucky enough, we are now slightly better than forecasted. So these forecast lines shows a clear pattern in which the forecaster thinks the immediate past is not normal, and the fertility rate will eventually come back to the normal level. It also shows the forecasters learning. Actually, this is a very intelligent forecast, and the demographic forecasters are well respected. I think more than respected than the economists. But these forecasters learning from the past experience is very, very slow. And it takes more than 30 years to catch up to actual decline in the fertility rate somewhere here. And this is almost the same things you can see. This is a revision of the Japanese life expectancy forecast. And this is the 1992, and then the 1997, and 2002, 2006, and then we see finally we've got kind of right forecast. So, and move on to the second one, which is be proactive, not reactive. Policymakers are increasingly under pressure. This is very important. Policymakers are increasingly under pressure with respect to their accountability, which implies that their policy should be evidence-based. Then, even in the case that the policymakers sense sizable changes, they tend to avoid making decisions immediately when available economic data do not show these changes. They do not want to make, quote, premature and, quote, judgment that may induce future criticism. They simply wait and see more data. And unfortunately, the data is not so good. This table 1 shows a history of GDP revision in Japan. And unfortunately, we have not the same, but a similar pattern in other countries. The release date of the quarterly estimates of annualized quarterly GDP growth is shown in the top row here. And the leftmost column lists the quarter which I would like to examine. And the right side moment is a kind of final estimate. I pick up more notable time where policy action is surely needed. 2007 is the third quarter Q3, which is the so-called Paribas shock occurred. And this is, yes. And the second one is the 1 year later, in which Lehman Brothers collapsed. And finally, this is the deep crisis time. And for example, let me look at the Paribas shock. I'm sorry. Let's look at the Paribas shock. It starts with 2.6. And actually, potential growth rate calculated by the Bank of Japan, it's close to 1%, and below 1%, but close to 1%. And the 2.6% is a decent economic growth at that time. And then we see the change, revision, and it ends up with a very sharp decline. So the point is that a decent growth turned out to be a sharp contraction. And almost a similar story I found here is 2008, the Lehman shock time, and we start with minus 0.4. It's a kind of steady things, and then we end up with a very sharp decline. And also this is something like this. And then if we have something like this, it's a sharp underestimation, and then we see the sharp kind of the underestimation with respect to the other way around. So the point is that Unfortunately, the data your policy is based on, or should be based on, it's not so reliable. I regret to say, because I'm responsible right now for the Japanese statistics. And I'm responsible for that. And this is the time I was at a bank, so I'm not responsible for that numbers. But unfortunately, I will be responsible for that. And then the third one is a communication policy. The third lesson, communicate effectively. When the economy undergoes a deep structural change and the old way of thinking is no longer valid, both in the Main Street and the financial market, then the communication policy becomes all the more important to explain the problems we face and the policy we needed. Moreover, both consumers and investors often show a susceptibility to the hoarding behavior, which often leads to the excessive optimism in the good time and excessive pessimism in the bad time. The policymaker needs to be versatile to be effective in their communications. So, Abenomics. Oops. Actually, this part you already heard. But anyway, I should say first the Abenomics background, because Abenomics is not something like a new policy which is out of the blue. Before making assessment so-called Abenomics, it is necessary to look into its background. There were four wars in the Japanese economy in December 2019 and 2012, where Abenomics was first presented in the media. The first is a series of bad luck. In fact, Japan experienced unprecedented real side effect of the global financial crisis. Although the direct effects of financial crisis was much smaller in Japan than in United States and in Europe, the banking crisis that had severe contractionary effects on Japanese exports of durables. And moreover, there was a series of natural disasters and accidents that followed. In March 11, a great northern Japan earthquake hit the country at a time when the Japanese economy showed a nascent recovery from the deep recession followed the great financial crisis. And moreover, the accompanied tsunami triggered the nuclear power plant accident in Fukushima, which you all know, which is the worst of this kind in the past 2 decades. This had a devastating effect on consumer sentiment, efficiently kills the nascent recovery at that time. Moreover, all nuclear power plants were shut down because of the public outcry for safety, making fossil fuel imports surge and current accounts surplus shrink quite dramatically. Now we are in the deficit range, as a huge deficit range. Yeah. And the third, the second war is overvaluation of yen. And yen appreciated considerably from 106 yen to the dollar to 77 on December 11. And yen stayed in 80s, $80 yens to the dollars for more than 2.5 years. This is unprecedented. So the change in the exchange rate had a very slow effects on locational choice of producers in Japan. So right now, as Kimura-san explained, that right now, not only large corporations, but small corporations, or small to medium-sized corporations, or even tiny corporations, having only, employing only 5 employees, are now multinationals, and going beyond the border of Japan. And the fourth, actually, the third is the reactive policies. Unfortunately, Japanese policy makings before Abenomics was plagued by inaction, delay, and characteristic reactiveness. Unfortunately, I am in the part of that. This is partly due to the political instability, so I have an excuse. That followed the ouster of the Liberal Democratic Party from the power in July 2009, at the time of the deep economic trouble. The lack of political leadership or statesmanship became increasingly apparent both in the ruling party and also opposing parties in the midst of natural disasters and economic contraction. These observations lead to the prevalent pessimism in business and consumer sentiments. To put it succinctly, when Abenomics was proposed, Japanese economic activities and business and consumer sentiments was the lowest in the history, in the past history of 20 years or something like that. So it was a right time to address a change. So let me talk about the Abenomics, but perhaps you might know all, so I just can skip the Abenomics. Abenomics is 3 arrow promises, December 2012. And the first arrow is a bold monetary policy, and actually bold means that the bullying Bank of Japan. So I'm really bullying. And then the second arrow is a flexible fiscal policy, but it turned out to be spending on the infrastructures. There has some merits in that, but simply it's a kind of the public work. And the third arrow is an investment enhancing structural reform. I will come back later. The substantive part of the bold monetary policy is the policy change of Bank of Japan on April 4, 2013. And this figure shows the magnitude of policy change. Here, the ratio of the central bank's balance sheet for nominal GDP was projected in April for 4 central banks: the Federal Reserve Bank, European Central Bank, actually 4 central banks. This is the Federal Reserve. This is the ECB, and this is Bank of Japan, and I add People's Bank of China. This figure is quite astonishing. The Bank of Japan tripled this ratio from 1994 to somewhere here, tripled this ratio from 1994 to this moment, and the Fed did in a similar way from 2007 to the day. April decision showed that the Bank of Japan thought that the size of the balance sheet was proven to be inadequate and would double it decisively in 1 year. So this is their promise. Actually, this part is my promise, and this part is their promise. And then this shows that the size, the change is quite astonishing, and we are now approximately toppling People's Bank of China. In the People's Bank of China, it has a much underdeveloped financial system, and there's a greater demand for currency, but not in Japan, but Japan Bank of Japan just want to topple the People's Bank. And the second figure, figure 4, it's a bold monetary policy and its effects, especially the distortion. If we look at in the first quarter of 2013, the Fed purchases accounted for 28% of the total government's bond issuance. This was sizable and stirred the controversy because the Fed becomes a whale in the pond and distorting normal functioning of the financial market, especially with respect to the price-finding mechanism of the market. In contrast, the Bank of Japan would buy 76% of the total government bond issuance in the fiscal year 2007. That is their promise in April. If the Fed is a whale in the pond, then what is the Bank of Japan? So it would clearly distort the market and raise the specter of debt monetization in several corners of the financial market. And what is the result? Actually, it is fair to say Abenomics has a spectacular initial success. It changed the market sentiment or expectations drastically in the way unseen for the past 3 decades, to say the least. The sentiment changed almost by 180 degrees in the initial 5 months from December to May, from pessimism to optimism. This was especially the case in news media. People once complaining that my glass is half empty and things are not improving were instead saying that it is half full and things are getting better, even though not much has been changed in the real time. So Abenomics is and especially successful in changing international perception of Japanese politics. For example, one prominent international security expert described Abe as one of the 3 true leaders remaining in the globe. And another 2 is Xi Jinping in China and also the Mexican president. I don't know why they choose 3. But perhaps ironically, however, the Abenomics momentum has been faded after the Bank of Japan's bold monetary policy was put in full motion. Asset prices are higher, but their volatility increased considerably. I will show you. This is the stock market. And this figure depicts the movement of stock prices, Nikkei 225. And the Nikkei climbed from around 9,000 to, actually, I should say, from 9,000 in November and to 15,000 on May 16th. However, the market clearly, the market's upward trend is clearly faded since the this so-called Q-squared easing of Bank of Japan, and we see this is something like quite a volatile market. And then afterward, we see some kind of small increase, but clearly because of the tapering in the United States. But the point is that the initial momentum, such an incredible initial momentum, has faded away, and today is something like here. And the next slide, I'm sorry. Next slide. This is the bond markets. And the Abenomics has a sizable effects on the long-term JGB rate. This is 10-year JGB rate, which was the most important reference rate showing the investor's assessment of the financial market conditions. From around 0.75, this risk-free rate went down all the way down to below 0.5. However, after the policy change of April, it shot up to 0.9. You can't imagine what shocking for us, because we are so used to the very low rate. in the, that kind of volatility is not a story for you, but it's a big story for us. And the, I'm sorry, and then volatility is relatively dwindled. But the reason why we have the lower volatility and also the lower rates again is that there is a skepticism about the ability of the Bank of Japan to achieve a 2% in 2 years pledge. And the similar story and the more telling story is seen in a real market. This is the so-called Economy Watcher survey, which is a sentiment survey, but has a very good tracking record of predicting real GDP growth. And here, we see a kind of initial success of Abenomics from the bottom to the top. Actually, this top is a time of a BOJ policy change. And then we have quite a sharp decline of sentiments. Actually, this is the composite sentiments of consumers and also the producers. Partly because of the consumption tax hike. And here is a pure consumption, pure consumer sentiments data. And you see this is the, it also went up about the time of BOJ policy change, and then it went down. And there is a small kind of recovery here. This is the 2020 Olympic game in Tokyo. So there is a kind of temporary pickup. So I'll go on to the recapitulation. Abenomics has a spectacular initial success in changing the nation's mood, which is particularly matters in politics. And here, Prime Minister Abe apparently learned at least partly from the lessons I explained before. In particular, first, Abenomics was proactive and not reactive policy, and Abenomics was considered to be the bold, decisive initiative, not reacting to ever-changing, noisy current conditions, but proactive for future secular change. Moreover, the Prime Minister's communication policy was impressively successful in convincing firms and consumers that a better future was ahead of them, and at least that the worst was over, which is previous prime ministers had failed to achieve. However, Abenomics, in contrast, Abenomics faded momentum after the BOJ board policy change is partly due to the recognition of uncertainty in the future, not only about the monetary policy, but also the fiscal and structural reform. As it stands now, Abenomics, unfortunately, is largely still a promise, especially with respect to the most important third arrow of investment-enhancing structural change. Moreover, there is a fear among people both in the Main Street and the financial markets that a temporary loosening of fiscal consolidations may turn out to be a permanent one, and thus eventually lead to be a debt monetization. Here, there is a pressing need to show that Prime Minister is free from wishful thinking, and that he is an effective communicator as well. He should explain, for example, what structural reform will the government implement, which is effective to raise the growth potential, which is investment, and to counteract population aging, which is labor-related. Also, he should elucidate what is the roadmap of the financial consolidation, which is bold enough, bold to be effective, and realistic to be persuasive. So finally, I conclude the remark. I would like to emphasize that there is a good chance of ultimate success for Abenomics. I say some ironical words, but I think this is very important. Unfortunately, we have no additional bad luck, and the natural recovery phase is set in motion, and some new good lucks like Olympic Games, and also the still very favorable perception of the people. However, avoid wishful thinking, be proactive, and communicate effectively. These three lessons, three dictums are very important. So he should be flexible enough to follow these three dicta and garner the perception that policymaker actually follows these three data. This is the end of my talk. Thank you.